as we are going into the end part of this fabulous Diabetes India by Dr. Bansi Sabu and Dr. Arvind. So thank you very much for making me a part of this very important seminar. So today I am going to discuss a drug which is not really very commonly used, so underused, and we will be discussing what are the pros and cons of repaglinite. So dear friends, as we all know, the diabetes requires multiple therapy, combination of therapy. The repaglinite is also considered to be one of the good molecule. So today we are going to have some introductory discussion about the diabetes and its global impact. Then we will be discussing some of the importance of postprandial hyperglycemia. What are the current therapies in postprandial hyperglycemia management? And then of course the molecule which will be discussed at length will be repaglinite. Discussion about mode of action, what are the indications and doses, what are the side effects and contraindications. There are some clinical evidences there, then place of therapy of repaglinite, and then we will be having summary of this. So dear friends, if you look into epidemiology, we all know at present we are having something like 9% prevalence, 77 million diabetic patients in India, and figures are going to be more than 101 in 2035. So we always discuss that during control of hyperglycemia, fasting, postprandial HbA1c, we want to avoid hypoglycemia and we want to have least of glycemic variability. And that's why we say all together in a single word that glycemic pentate. So in that pentate, the most important part remains quality of life also, and we then label it as glycemic hexate. So dear friends, we spend large amount of our time in postprandial phase because we are eating 3 major meals. In between we are eating some small snacks. So patients with type 2 diabetes may be spending more than 12 hours per day in the postprandial status. And you find that in a normal person, as soon as he starts eating, there is a first phase of insulin secretion and it is followed by second phase of insulin secretion. First phase lasts for 10 to 15 minutes, and then second phase lasts for as long as normoglycemia is not achieved. And loss of first phase of insulin secretion is considered to be the earliest change in the development of type 2 diabetes, and this loss of first phase of insulin is also contributing to the postprandial hyperglycemia. If you look into relative contribution of fasting and postprandial hyperglycemia to A1C, we find that once the patient is newly diagnosed, his HbA1c is in between 7 to 8.5 or so. And in that range, the contribution of postprandial hyperglycemia is very high as compared to contribution by fasting hyperglycemia. Is postprandial hyperglycemia harmful? Yes, of course, because there are many studies which clearly indicate that postprandial hyperglycemia is an independent risk factor for the cardiovascular complications, and it is associated with so many micro and macrovascular complications, increase in carotid intima media thickness, decrease in myocardial blood flow and volume, and there are more, you can say, risk of cancers and impaired cognitive function. Postprandial hyperglycemia basically causes oxidative stress, inflammation, and endothelial dysfunction. You can see here large number of defects and consequences are there as a result of postprandial hyperglycemia, whether it is increase in insulin resistance, glucose autooxidation, increase in triglycerides, decrease in HDL, hypercoagulability of the blood, decrease in fibrinolytic activity, increase in low-grade inflammation, endothelial dysfunction, decreasing plaque stability, and you find so many other defects. So uncontrolled postprandial hyperglycemia may lead to serious consequences. Thus, it is important to control postprandial hyperglycemia. We have also learned many messages and many lessons from the UKPDS. We know that HbA1c is equivalent to fasting plus postprandial, but here once the HbA1c is less than 8.5, contribution of postprandial is higher. Previously, it was considered that HbA1c is mainly depending on fasting, but now we realize that in 8.5 and below, it is mainly contributed by postprandial hyperglycemia. And there are many studies which clearly links postprandial hyperglycemia to increase in cardiovascular risk and mortality. So it is a need for the hour to control postprandial hyperglycemia and reduce the risk of complications. So current available therapies which are there for the management of postprandial hyperglycemia are like alpha glucosidase inhibitor, glinides like ripaglinide and natiglinide, short-acting sulfonylurea, and short-acting insulin. And in addition, we had DPP-4 inhibitors which are also targeting postprandial hyperglycemia. But today we are going to discuss at length ripaglinide. Ripaglinide is a short-acting insulin secretagogue, just like sulfonylurea, but they are different from sulfonylurea and they are short in their action. So they are short-acting insulin secretagogue used for the reduction of postprandial hyperglycemia in our type 2 diabetic patients. They are having a favorable safety profile with low risk of hypoglycemia as compared to sulfonylurea. Their potency is good. They are very effective drug and they elicited insulin release in more rapid and brief form. So insulin release is rapid, but it lasts for a short time. And that's why the chances of hypoglycemia is less. And it can be used with other, you can say, oral anti-diabetic drugs other than sulfonylurea, like metformin. So most commonly used combination is ripaglinide with metformin. If you compare ripaglinide with sulfonylurea and mechanism of action, you find that sulfonylurea acts at the sulfonylurea receptors, blocks the ATP sensitive potassium channels, closure of the channels, then causes depolarization, then calcium channel opens and there is a release of insulin by exocytosis. But there is some difference, subtle differences as ripaglinide is acting with sulfonylurea. So ripaglinide exerts direct action on the pancreatic beta cell, unlike the sulfonylurea. As we know that glucose is entering into the beta cell and causing, leading to formation of ATP from the ADP. And ripaglinide binds to a receptor which is different from that of sulfonylurea binding site at the ATP sensitive potassium channel. So binding site is slightly different than sulfonylurea. And then the rest of the mechanism is more or less similar. It causes closure of ATP dependent potassium channel, thereby leading on to depolarization and opening up of the calcium channels, leading on to insulin exocytosis. But slight difference is that ripaglinide, unlike sulfonylurea, glucose dependent insulin release, which is helpful in reducing the blood glucose, but on other hand, it is very effectively reducing postprandial hyperglycemia, and chances of hypoglycemia is significantly less. So let's look at a glance about ripaglinide. It is having distinct binding site at the beta cell membrane, greater insulinotropic effect than the glibenclamide and or glimepiride, a more rapid onset of action, greater stimulation of insulin release and reduction of blood glucose level than glimepiride and glibenclamide. Effects were glucose dependent, and that's why the chances of hypoglycemia are less. Glucose and dose dependent insulinotropic effects is seen. So as you keep on increasing the dose, we have better, you can say, insulin release. So other benefits of ripaglinide is that it improves the beta cell function in patients with type 2 diabetes, restores the early phase insulin secretion. That is very important, that somehow it is short acting. That's why it is restoring the early phase of insulin secretion, improves postprandial hyperglycemia and reduces lipolysis. Because of its rapid onset of action and short life, you can say short-lived action, hypoglycemic effects are shorter. So let's look at the pharmacokinetics of this drug. Absorption is very rapid. It is complete within a period of 1 hour or so. Tmax is achieved at 1 hour, and it is bioavailable by 56%. And you find that it is distributed in all the areas, and you find that it is highly protein bound. 98% of the drug is protein bound, and it is mainly metabolized at the level of the liver by you can say biotransformation and direct conjugation with glucuronic acid. And this process is CYP450 enzyme mediated. And that's why this cytochrome P450 enzyme is required for the metabolism of this drug. And metabolites are not active, so they are neutral, and it is eliminated in the bile. That's why you find 90% of the drug is recovered in the urine in an inactive form, and T half-life is about 1 hour. So these are some of the unique features which make the repaglinide different from sulfonylurea. And you can see that it is to be indicated in patients who are on diet and exercise. And adjunct to that, if the patients are not controlled with diet and exercise, you can use it as a monotherapy. But you can also use it as a add-on therapy to patients who are not controlled with diet, exercise, metformin or thiazolidinedione, AGI or DPP-4 inhibitors. So that's why you find that this drug is useful. And repaglinide is effective as a prandial glucose regulator, and it should be taken before meal, something like 10 to 15 minutes before meal. And you find that if the patient is eating 2 meals, he has to take 2 tablets before each meal. If he is taking 3 meals, every meal should be having a repaglinide before meal. And if the patient is omitting the meal, he should be omitting repaglinide also. Therefore, if a meal is missed or delayed, you find that repaglinide should not be given at that time. That is important. And what are the contraindications to repaglinide? It should not be given in our type 1 diabetic patients who are suffering from diabetic ketoacidosis, because it is metabolized in liver. And that's why it should be avoided in moderate to severe liver patients, injury patients. And it should not be given with gemfibrozil or clopidogrel, because somehow the values of, you can say, hypoglycemia are very high when you are using it with gemfibrozil or clopidogrel. That is an important caution. Doses are no fixed dosage regimen. You start with 0.5 milligram. You keep on increasing according to the blood glucose profile. And according to the meal, patient taken 2 meals or 3 meals or 4 meals, you have to give it before meals. And maximum doses can be 16 milligram per day. So most of the time we are using 1 to 2 milligram before meal in our usual practice, but you can use up to 4 milligram before each meal, and the maximum dose is 16 milligram. And patients who are not previously treated with any oral antidiabetic drugs, you can start with low dose like 0.5 milligram and then up titrate according to the blood glucose profile. Patients who are treated with other drugs or having a HbA1c which is in a higher range, like more than 8%, you can start with 1 or 2 milligram with each meal. And combination of therapy can be given, as we say, that you start with low dose with combination and then gradually up titrate. So according to the renal profile, we have to be a bit cautious, but because it is eliminated by the bile, so chances of problem is not there in mild to moderate renal function. So here you can see creatinine clearance of 40 to 80. You can use full doses. In 20 to 40, you should start with low dose and gradually and slowly up titrate. Below 20 ml per minute of creatinine clearance, you should avoid this drug. Drug-drug interaction is a bit important. Drugs which are inducing CYP3A4, like barbiturates, carbimazepine, rifampicin, etc., may increase the repaglinide metabolism, and you have to increase the doses of repaglinide. Otherwise, sugar will go up. Drugs which inhibit the CYP3A4, like erythromycin, clarithromycin, ketoconazole, miconazole, they inhibit the repaglinide metabolism, and then you find higher glucose reduction will be there with repaglinide. So you have to be careful about that. Those drugs which increases the hyperglycemia, sometimes you find that your drug is not really effective. So you look at that. And we discussed about gemfibrozil, which causes increase in the blood level of this drug and then causes more hypoglycemia. So we have to be cautious while using repaglinide. We have to monitor blood glucose. We have to give it just before meal. Meal means you have to take first drug and then within 10-15 minutes you have to take your meal. And it should be avoided during pregnancy. Lactation should not be given below 18 years of age. Above 65, you should be very careful. And about 75 years of age, we should not give, because there is no clinical data. In renal function, we can use with low doses, and we should be careful about, you can say, renal significant renal impairment, where we should avoid it. In liver dysfunction, of course, because it is eliminated by liver, so we should be more careful. And in moderate or severe liver impairment, we should be avoiding this drug. And because in hepatic dysfunction, what happens, gluconeogenesis and glucose output from the liver also decreases, so the chances of hypoglycemia is more. There are some clinical evidences with this drug. A study found that ripaglinide controls postprandial hyperglycemia excursion better than the glimepiride, associated with significant decline in other surrogate cardiovascular, you can say, profile like markers of inflammation, platelet activation, and lipid profiles are improved. It suggests that indirectly or indirectly there may be some important role in lowering the cardiovascular risk and cardiovascular benefits. That is very important because the drug is acting only at the beta cell site. So it is not acting on the cardiocyte, cardiac myocyte, or in vascular cells. That's why ripaglinide treatment is not associated with any cardiovascular adverse effect. It has higher reduction as compared to glibenclamide in carotid intima media thickness. It also diminishes the progression of CIMT, markers of inflammation, platelet activation, lipid parameters, endothelial function, and adiponectin and oxidative stress. So these are some of the subtle, you can say, effects of ripaglinide, and it is associated with lower cardiovascular risk than other insulin secretagogue. In one of these Danish study, registry I should say, you look into patients with no previous myocardial infarction, total death, or cardiovascular death, or MI, stroke, or cardiovascular death. You find if the metformin is at line of unity, then you find that ripaglinide is on the left side of line of unity as compared to other sulfonylureas, indicating that as compared to other sulfonylureas, this drug is having better profile. Ripaglinide has a positive effect on the antioxidant parameters, and it plays an important role in protecting the kidney from oxidative insult also. As regards side effect profile, if you compare them to sulfonylurea, you find that more or less similar profile is there, but hypoglycemia is less. Severe hypoglycemia is really very, very less with ripaglinide. So you find that similarly it is tolerated. And recommended ripaglinide in CKD, you can see here, because it is excreted by the liver into the bile. So in CKD patients, the chances of you can say upgradation of the ripaglinide is not there. So ACE guidelines, Spanish Society Nephrology guidelines, and Canadian Healthcare Societies and other Swiss and others, they highlighted that it can be given in patients with moderate to severe renal impairment patients also. Even in patients who are having peritoneal dialysis, they recommend that you can use ripaglinide. So it is considered to be safe in our patients. So most of the time we are using it in mild to moderate renally impaired patients. What is the place of ripaglinide? You find that ripaglinide restores the first phase of insulin secretion, and it is a potent drug, and particularly when you are using it with metformin, significant HbA1c reduction is there. And ripaglinide is a choice of drug in our CKD patients, and ripaglinide has the choice of drug when you are having cardiovascular risk patients. So these are some of the points where you can consider ripaglinide in place of sulfonylurea, where you are really thinking that more chances of hypoglycemia, or patient is having kidney disease or having cardiovascular risk profile. So in the end, we can see that this combination of ripaglinide and metformin is considered to be the best approach, because we know that combination therapy is required. Metformin on one hand reduces insulin resistance and causes decrease in fasting hyperglycemia. Ripaglinide, which is taking, you can say, improve the first phase of insulin secretion and acting as a postprandial glucose regulator. So a optimum management can be seen with metformin and ripaglinide, because the actions of metformin and ripaglinide are complementary to each other. And you can see here in this slide that when you are using ripaglinide alone or metformin alone, less number of patients are able to have good HbA1c control. But once you are using a combination of ripa plus metformin, greater number of patients achieve glycemic goal, and combination therapy appears to be a good treatment choice in our patient. So dear friends, in summary, ripaglinide is a underused and under-discussed drug, but it is a rapid-acting insulin secretagogue, but works slightly different from sulfonylurea, lowers postprandial glucose excursions by targeting early phase of insulin release, effective glycemic control, and it is well tolerated. Effective in treatment-naive and adult patients on other oral antidiabetic drugs in our type 2 diabetic patients, including elderly patient up to 65, but above 65 to 75, we have to use lower doses and we should be more careful. And it can be given in our mild to moderate renally impaired patients. And flexibility of doses is also very important, because many a times it is seen that when you are using sulfonylurea, patient has to take 3 meals, because otherwise in between he will develop hypo. But here, if the patient is eating, he is taking a dose of ripaglinide. If he is skipping a meal, he is skipping ripaglinide also. So the forceful in between, you can say, snacking, etc., are not there. And thereby, in many of these studies, ripaglinide is losing weight. Patients are losing weight on ripaglinide as compared to patients on sulfonylurea, probably because in ripaglinide treated patient, they are not forced to take snacks in between the meals, and they have not to omit their meals. So here you find that ripaglinide, 1 meal, 1 dose, extra meal, extra dose, no meal, no dose. That is the flexibility given to our patients there. So with that, I thank all of you. Thank you very much.